launched its Sustainability Impact Report. And we'll be discussing this with the CEO, Mr. Kariuki Ngari, on what this means for green financing in Kenya and beyond. Join us for that conversation, but first, let's take a look at his profile.
Kariuki is an accomplished career banker with over 23 years of retail banking experience. He earned his recognition through successfully transforming the consumer banking divisions of Standard Chartered Bank Kenya and Standard Chartered Regional Africa. A seasonal financial professional, he has held various senior leadership roles across the industry. Prior to his current role, he was the global head retail distribution for Standard Chartered Bank in Singapore. There, he was instrumental in formulating global strategies in building the future of retail branch and voice and virtual landscapes through digitization of the physical channels and revision of branch models and standards. Prior to his global role, Kariuki was the regional head of Retail Clients Africa between 2013 and 2015 and the executive director Kenya and East Africa from 2009 to 2013. He has also held senior positions in Barclays Bank of Kenya Limited.
Welcome to another exciting edition of the Trading Bell. Today we have a special focus on matters dealing with sustainability in businesses. And we are joined by the Managing Director for Standard Chartered Bank Kenya. This is none other than Kariuki Ngari. Many thanks for making time for us on the show.
Thank you.
Well, many organizations are transitioning towards sustainability impact reporting. Perhaps let's begin by demystifying what is all this all about and how important is it for companies in this day and age?
Thank you. I think the first thing you have to accept is we are living in unprecedented times and very, very challenging times. The way we did business in the past cannot be, if we continue doing business the way we've always done it in the past, we will destroy our planet. In terms of when you talk about matters of sustainability, let's talk about climate change. For instance, we know the impact that the drastic climate change has had on Kenya. Kenya is a living example. We're in the month of May, for instance, and you can see the rains have failed us. If you talk about if we don't do anything about it, the global warming is going to cause a very big impact. That's one part. Then you talk about the part of proper governance. What are the governance practices that you're employing in terms of the business you run, the operations? Is it building or destroying the environment? That is important. So when you talk about sustainability, is the realization that companies, whether big or small, can only continue being sustainable, making profits over the long term, if the environment they're operating is sustainable. Hence the importance, when you talk about sustainability, that is what you're talking about. And that's why companies today are realizing that is something that you must pivot to that. And when you talk about impact reporting, is to actually be out there to declare to the wider public what you're doing as a company, so that you're open to scrutiny and you can have a baseline to continue building on, so that you can improve on what you do every day, every year. Otherwise, if you don't have a baseline, if you don't have a measurement, then it just becomes talking shop.
All right. Of course, for many of the viewers right now, they're trying to understand what is a bank doing in sustainable impact reporting instead of giving loans and pushing on with life.
That's a good question, but ask yourself, what are the loans for? You have to give loans. First of all, let's talk about, if we just cut ourselves, forget about even being part of a much wider ecosystem as a bank. But if you take a bank like Standard Chartered, when we give the loans are being used for means of production. But what is the means of production being done? A good example is fossil fuels. Let's say like coal, for instance. Coal is very destructive to the environment. So it's very easy for us to continue giving funding operations that are mining coal, but look at the damage it's doing to the environment. And that's why at Standard Chartered we said we will not be funding any coal-fired plants going forward. So it's very deliberate for us that we know that we are a force for good. When we avail financing, then we have to ensure that the practices that are the businesses that we are supporting are employing sustainable practices. That's one. Then there's the impact, how we can mobilize. When you look at this sphere, when you look at the targets that globally has been put, whether it's net zero, get to net zero by 2050, it requires a huge amount of money, in excess of 4 trillion. So how do we mobilize those resources? It requires mobilizing resources from different sectors, different parts of groups. So whether it's a private sector, whether it's a public sector, whether it's multilateral. So how do we bring all these together? That's another role we can play. And finally, if we don't do this and we destroy the environment, then what business will we be playing? So it's a realization that we have a very big role to play, not only as a bank, but as a responsible citizen, because we want to be a responsible company.
All right. And let's fast forward this conversation, Mr. Ngari. When you talk about banks and organizations to align themselves towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we are in a critical space and time where we're just coming from a pandemic that is not yet clearing off in most of our economies. And on the same end, we are seeing business continuity was a very important pillar for companies during COVID and as we also come to the tail end of COVID. From where you sit, how do the two connect? Sustainability, impact reporting, as well as business continuity?
I think if there's anything COVID-19 has taught us, because it's still there, we can't say it's gone. What COVID-19 has taught us, preparedness. It is very important. If you look at some years back, there was a lot of people out there who are talking about a pandemic. They had not been identified what it was, but it was clearly people kept on saying there were scientists out there, people in the public health sphere kept on talking about that sooner or later, the world is going to face a pandemic. But of course, people didn't prepare or they didn't hear. They chose to say those are naysayers, those are prophets of doom. So people didn't prepare. That is why it is important when you talk about matters climate change to start being prepared. The scientists out there, the people who are very heavily involved in the studying what is happening to our atmosphere, to our beautiful planet, are telling us we are destroying the planet. And the best example for us is the way we can see global change, the climate change that is real. That we can see some areas that used to receive rain very often are no longer receiving rain, or some areas are receiving excess rainfall. So that tells us, we've been told if you don't do anything about this, in years to come, the planet is going to be inhabitable. And that's what is important. So let COVID-19 be a lesson for mankind, that when scientists or people are warning about challenges that are coming, it's important to get prepared. And this is why we are here today as companies. That's why we are talking about what we are doing at Standard Chartered. How do we start making sure that we are prepared? How do we ensure that we carry along our clients and our partners? And how do we come together, whether as corporates or SMEs, so that we move on this journey together? And most important as well is how do we bring in the government? Because the public sector is key. Without involvement of the public sector, you cannot make the strides that you need to make.
And let's talk about the pool of financing, especially now for green projects, green financing. As a bank, how are the numbers looking, and is there an uptake following that decision by the bank to take to ensure that they keep off things that are not aligned towards a green sustainable economy?
Yes, we've seen a lot of interest. We've seen a lot of interest in terms of the companies coming to us and saying, I want to move away from the current my current operation, which is heavily reliant on unsustainable practices. I want to transition. So for me to transition, I require financing. It could be probably they've been using diesel generators and they are saying now I want to put solar panels for my operation. Maybe they've been using a water treatment that is not the modern standard, and they want to move to that level. So we've seen that, and for our role is when they come to us, we say, how can we help you? How can we give you, whether it's a green bond, it could be a loan, but mainly it could be a green loan or a green bond, where somebody wants to launch, and we help them go through the practice. Because for any of our facilities to qualify to be classified as a green bond or a green loan, a certain criteria you must meet. What is the end use for it? The end use is very, very important. What is it being used for? And is it really for sustainable practices? And we've seen that happening. So I would say, yes, the uptick is there. I think in terms of, we spend a lot of time sensitizing what we can do, ensuring the clients are comfortable, and we're having conversations. And you will start seeing this coming. It will become mainstream sooner rather than later.
All right. And one of the big campaigns in your sustainability reporting is on accelerating zero, lifting participation, as well as resetting globalization. What opportunities are there for SMEs in all this?
When we look at whether it's on accelerating zero or lifting participation or resetting globalization, there's big opportunities in there. I'll just give you about 2-3 examples. When we launched our carbon data report last year, we said that companies in this part of the world, that is Kenya, because Kenya was part of the study that was undertaken, the risk was in excess of $3 billion. Because as a global multinationals transition, and quite a number of those multinationals source their raw materials from Kenya, for instance, as they also accelerate their plans, they will expect the same of their suppliers. And a lot of those suppliers are here. It could be the SMEs. So there's a big role to play. So there's an opportunity to see how do you transition, whether it's on terms of solar energy. That is important. Whether it's in terms of gas, whether it's on biogas, usage of biogas. That's an area that the SMEs can play. When you see this opportunity, when you talk about $4 trillion, that's what is required globally to transition to sustainable practices. That $4 trillion is not going to sit with a few companies. It's going to trickle down to all the economies, whether it's on sustainable farming practices. So all I see are opportunities. These are big opportunities in terms of as we transition, when you lift the participation from different diverse groups, especially the marginalized, who are mainly women and youth, that is going to make the big difference. So those opportunities is what we as a bank are trying to be very clear about, so that we can partner with the SMEs, we can show them what the opportunities are, and we can bring them on board. Because this is a complex subject, but it can be simplified for everybody to understand and for everybody to see the role they can play.